Hello everyone and welcome to the 171st edition of DF Direct Weekly, our weekly discussion show covering the latest gaming and technology news. Plenty to get through this week. Joining me on the panel, first of all, he's back, Oliver McKenzie. Hi.
Yes, always a pleasure, Rich. This week it's a little bit of a more scant lineup, but I think we have some interesting topics regardless.
Absolutely, a lot of controversy this week. Alex Battaglia, hello.
Yeah, I was about to say we have our weekly Microsoft beatdown to go off of right this, but we'll get to that later.
Okay. Before we go on, of course, store.digitalfoundry.net. Check out all of our latest merchandising wares, including this Digital Foundry approved seal of quality t-shirt. Do enjoy. But with that, let's move on to our first news topic. Okay, so this week, Microsoft announced that, Xbox Game Pass streaming is available now for Amazon Fire Stick 4K and 4K Max, the latest models. I downloaded the app onto my Fire Stick. I've given it a go. But, and I'll have some impressions on that shortly. But also comes with an advertising campaign, which is essentially saying, literally, that you don't need an Xbox to play Xbox, which is, I think that's fairly controversial messaging. To the point, obviously, gets the point across. But I'm curious what you think this means strategically about where Microsoft is going. Let's start with Oliver.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's pretty inevitable in terms of Microsoft's overall trajectory that they would start pitching the idea that you don't really need an Xbox to play Xbox, and they would start pitching that Xbox experience a little bit less and the Game Pass more front and center. But I think that only goes so far as the actual quality of the experience, and I think the actual experience using Xbox game streaming has not been very good at all. I think it's optimistic to say that if you don't have an Xbox, don't worry, because the actual quality of the game streaming on a phone or a tablet or a computer without that Xbox hardware or a Fire Stick, I'm sure, is not so good. It's not very much like playing a current-gen console, even on the Series S hardware in which it's derived, obviously. On a phone or a tablet, the concessions aren't quite so bad, but especially on a television, I just don't really see it. So personally, if I'm in a situation like that, I would never want to play Xbox without an Xbox. I'd rather grab a Switch or just play on my phone, maybe play a one-tap phone game or something simple like that. I really would not want to play an Xbox without an Xbox, but I think that ultimately if they do want to go with this marketing, that it needs to be backed up by a superior service, if not a good service, if not the best in the business, rather, then at least a good quality service that's at least, up there with Sony, I guess would be the bare minimum, but even that isn't probably good enough.
Yeah.
Alex?
Yeah, for me, I think when I see that advertisement and also the discussion around it, it does point to the fact that, for me, it's not a fact then in that place, that Microsoft's slowly exiting the traditional console market. That's the way it feels, because, I don't consume console games, but I am aware of advertising around console games. You see them all throughout, here in Berlin, and there's just no presence, mind share for Microsoft's Xbox here. And I think switching to this, we focus on streaming model, and then we also highlight it as part of it that you don't need a box. I don't know if it's the good long-term strategy at the moment, given the lack of mind share that I see from my end. I don't think it's going to offer necessarily a super compelling experience for most people that are really interested in it, based upon what I've seen and played and the coverage that we've done. I don't think it is actually a good, like Oliver said, replacement for the box, because it isn't offering any of the image quality or performance or really any of that, or the latency as well too. I think it needs to be in a much better position to actually start being a great advertising point. If it had the quality of something like Nvidia's a game streaming service, then I could totally say, oh yeah, this makes sense. But right now, in the current place where it's at, and also the current Xbox market position, it seems like they're talking about it in this intense way too early as a replacement for the box.
Yeah. Where do we begin with this? I mean, I did buy a Fire Stick to test this out. I've been eagerly awaiting it. And, it is essentially well, it's Xbox game streaming. There's nothing special about it, which means I think Oliver hit the nail on the head there, essentially, which is to say that it has latency problems in that it's noticeable. I don't think it's game-changingly awful or anything. It's okay. Right. It works. And I think if we go back to Tom's PlayStation versus Xbox streaming piece, the Xbox latency was better, but the image quality was worse. The Fire Stick thing, it sets up very, very easily. You pair your controller very, very easily. The interface looks very much like the website, or more specifically, the Samsung app that they did, which doesn't really have any, obviously not surprising there. It is Xbox Series S games that you're streaming from the cloud, which again, Tom established back in the day. It is a 1080p stream. It's also a low bitrate, low quality 1080p stream. So yeah, as Oliver said, works fine on a tablet or a phone. In actual fact, I think the phone app gets a 720p stream, but even so, I think that's kind of okay for a mobile device. But, I tested it on my desktop 48-inch OLED, and it's really not great. And I think the missing part of the puzzle for Microsoft in aggressively pursuing streaming is you've got to make the quality of the experience compelling. Now, there's only so much that can be done with latency, right, owing to things like infrastructure and the laws of physics. But image quality, why not increase the bitrate for TVs? It knows exactly what client it's streaming to. It probably even has some idea of how big the screen is. But, TVs, it just highlights the quality of the stream being substandard pretty badly, to the point where, for example, in the background on the Starfield menu screen, you can see artifacts just on the gradient, the color gradients in the background. It's a traditionally poor thing that streaming isn't particularly great at handling, but it's there. Some games look all right. I mean, I tried Forza Horizon 5. It was okay, actually. Starfield did tend to break up a bit. I mean, it's all going to depend on the quality of the content going through what is effectively a one-size-fits-all encoder. And I just don't think the bitrate's there for a TV. It's that simple. And to put that forward as kind of like an acceptable way to play Xbox games, I'm not convinced. I would easily, put this side by side with a Series S, and, Series S is a cheap machine. You can pick it up, for virtually nothing secondhand. Please, if you're going to play Xbox, play it on the Series S. It's so much better. It's really sort of a bit disheartening.
Rich, I have a question for you regarding the Fire Stick. So for me, when I plug something into the USB of my television, it doesn't necessarily go into game mode. So there's going to be like extra input latency and all these other considerations.
In fairness, the Xbox app tells you to switch mode. To game mode. It does highlight this, and I think that's a good thing, because I think on my LG, as standard, you plug in the Fire Stick and it kind of went into filmmaker mode,
right?
Which is probably best for the majority of content on that you stream through a Fire Stick, right? But it's certainly not good enough for gaming. So to its credit, it did highlight that and said, "Whoa, hold on a minute! Make sure you're in the right mode for the best response." But even then, it's still using Wi-Fi, which it kind of has to really, which means that there's added latency on top of that. So, I think Tom did his latency tests through Ethernet just to kind of remove the variance of anybody's given Wi-Fi setup. But obviously, if you're using Wi-Fi instead of a cable, the latency will increase. It was okay. The gameplay experience was okay with a controller. But the image quality was just really, really poor, to the point where you look at it and it's, it's not good enough. It kind of does look like a playable YouTube stream.
Yeah.
It's just really sort of, I think if you're going to do a major product rollout, like the Samsung app, like the Fire Stick, and say to people, this is a great alternative way, or a way to play Xbox, you've got to deliver it with the quality of the experience, and it's kind of not there, which is, baffling to me.
Yeah. I think actually Microsoft might be in a good position to deliver something really special here, because obviously they have their machine learning technologies, including Auto SR, right?
Right.
Which is very interesting, very interesting. Already runs on an NPU. Well, yeah, I would add latency is a concern, but throw latency out the window for a second. Presume that maybe they build data centers super close to people, and latency is less of a concern. You could imagine like maybe a frame extrapolation or maybe interpolation technique to handle drop frames. Maybe, who knows? Probably it wouldn't work very well, but it could be okay for something like a phone, right, where you're dealing with a network connectivity problems on a more consistent basis. They could have some kind of AI upscaling model like Auto SR to improve image quality running on an NPU. As long as they can get that frame time down within a frame, it could be okay. You could use local NPUs in the phones, and now in Windows you have lots of devices with NPUs in them. And I think a sufficiently robust game streaming service could be really good, but I think beyond that home experience, it actually has to be pretty good on like a 4G connection as well. It has to be something that people want to use out and about in the go, because otherwise it seems like something that the appeal is a lot more limited, right? In these like Fire Stick TV type environments where you're already dealing with, an environment that could accommodate a console.
Right.
So I would suggest that like if Microsoft was investing into that could be a really interesting service. But at the moment, it's just like an also ran, not very good game streaming option that is like not as good as GeForce Now, which is, I think, to NVIDIA probably not as big of a deal as Xbox game streaming is to Microsoft, but I could be wrong.
I agree.
I don't know. I don't really know. We've got no numbers really. We don't really know how prevalent streaming is on Game Pass. And we've got no numbers at all from NVIDIA on how well GeForce Now is doing. What we do know about GeForce Now is that, to their credit, NVIDIA has continued to iterate, improve the data centers with every generation. They've basically done everything they can from a technical perspective to address the issues that we're seeing on other streaming services. They've pretty much licked latency, for example, which is a pretty phenomenal achievement. They can get better than local latency compared to a console on the same game, which is astonishing. They've got 4K 120.
They've got VRR.
They've got G-Sync. Yeah, they've got variable refresh rate on a streaming service. These are the kind of things that if it was a sort of low volume service that wasn't really of that importance to them, they probably wouldn't have done it, but they've done it regardless, and all credit to them. So yeah, I mean, I don't think the streaming situation is kind of hopeless. NVIDIA proves it can be done. In terms of the application of streaming, the mobile situation is interesting because, well, how do I put it? If you're on the go, you're kind of moving between different cell areas, right? Particularly if you're moving at speed, like on a train or something. And I'm not sure that the consistency is there to guarantee a good experience. It's all going to depend on infrastructure, right? But on a more general sort of strategic level, I'm kind of thinking that going back to this whole concept of, you don't need an Xbox to play an Xbox. I think looking to the future, Microsoft is taking a look at, what the new generation of gamers are doing. And, fundamentally, teenagers are sort of on their phones primarily. And, the guys and girls who are really into games move on to PC. And so they're probably looking to a future where the console is less relevant and where they can tap into where the users are actually going. And if it's phones and PCs, well, they're kind of going to get there eventually, right, with this strategy, and possibly get there in a way that, Nintendo and Sony won't. So I think the strategy is probably makes a lot more sense if you're looking at things globally across 5 to 10 years,
right? Possibly
less so right now, because if you're sending out a message that you don't need to buy a console, well, that kind of looks almost suicidal from a business perspective, right? Because one thing I do think is that Game Pass does need a home platform to sit on, to live on, and to sell from, and that is a console right now. And yeah, I think the transition to the next generation is going to be quite interesting, because I do think all the signs are pointing towards Microsoft basically moving towards a Surface type model where the console is like a PC and it's like a custom design and other people can create their own PCs/Xboxes. I think that's it. It's just we're in this awkward transition period right now. And it doesn't look great when you're basically trying to rewrite the rule book on what a gaming platform actually is. Mm-hmm. Oliver, any final thoughts?
No, in general, I'm just like not that happy with the overall quality of game streaming services. And personally, I'm a big advocate of using your own hardware. I love having my own own console and PC hardware, and I think that's going to provide the best experience in virtually any case if you have decent hardware. But I'm kind of resigned to the probability that game streaming is going to become a lot more common. I just think that the quality needs to improve quite a bit before it's even a comparable experience to other alternatives for mobile gaming like a Switch. I think it's just not nearly good enough. Maybe some of those issues are unresolvable. Like I don't think the network issues can truly ever be resolved, but maybe with enough accommodation on the device end, you could actually make that okay. In somewhat unstable circumstances, but it'll never be ideal, right?
I did like your idea of local device extrapolation or generation of frames for drop frames. Like there's nothing like this kind of harkens back to what Rich, when we talked with AMD about FSR3 back in Gamescom of last year. Maybe it was the year before. My brain's
It was last year.
It was last year. My brain's fried. This Corona just messed me up so bad with regards to time. But getting back into it, just basically the idea that your game runs to whatever refresh rate your TV or local device runs at, and any real performance issues are ironed out via frame generation. And I actually thought that idea was very compelling, especially for ultra high refresh rate monitors and things like that are going to be coming in time. But actually for the low end streaming side of things, or you already see this in, for example, VR devices targeted toward mobile, then using extrapolation, async time warp, interpolation for frames that are dropped actually makes a lot of sense to me. And I feel like that might be the bridging gap that Oliver was talking about to get that local already compromised experience to at least be somewhat better, because you just can't get around all the infrastructural bandwidth problems in the short term, at least in the physics problems. So I find that idea very interesting. But Microsoft, unfortunately, my nth degree take on this right now is that there's just not a wholehearted effort there from the quality perspective. And I kind of see this across the entire Microsoft portfolio, where I just like think about that Xbox app on PC, or I think about the Microsoft Store on PC, just like things that are just kind of like not really completely thought out.
There's a lot of work to do, isn't there?
That's the point. Yeah. It's like, yeah. Yeah, it's just like a lot of things. They say they start doing some work on something, and then it's kind of like just semi-abandoned, and then just keep pushing. They keep pushing, more content on something that's not a great basis already. And, this streaming feels a little bit like that in its current iteration.
I noticed you did a tweet, Alex, about how poor the Windows Store still is. And we've talked about this ad nauseum on the F-Direct Weekly. However, it's just fascinating to actually just click on the replies and see everybody's war stories. Their battles with the Windows Store app. Yeah. It's awful. Sort it out. How difficult is it to launch a game from an app? Answer, well, everybody else manages to do it. I still can't play Tomb Raider Definitive Edition on my PC.
Reason unknown.
Reason unknown. And of course, you had your Hellblade 2 scenario where you couldn't launch it.
Still can't. Still doesn't launch. It's
works fine on Steam. This is crazy. Anyway, quick supporter question here from Robert F. Greetings, gentlemen. Microsoft has told us we don't need an Xbox to play on Xbox. Do you think this business approach, and in light of the Series S significantly outselling Series X, affects Microsoft's next generation of consoles? Why is it necessary to win top of the flops? I love that.
I like that.
Quote unquote, top of the flops with expensive subsidized hardware when the majority of Xbox consumers opted for the Series S this generation. Surely a cheaper hybrid offering in line with current messaging makes more sense. What would such a machine look like? I think it's the handheld, right? They're talking about a handheld. There's no reason why your handheld can't connect to a TV screen and look okay. And in actual fact, I mean, we talked about Auto SR last week, and, base 720p can look reasonable upscaled via Auto SR to a 4K screen. So I reckon that's probably part of the puzzle, possibly. Top of the flops, yeah, it's an interesting one, but I think it's all about scalability. Microsoft want to keep up with trends of PC gaming, and the PC gamer does demand a certain degree of fidelity at the top end. And I honestly think, it probably serves both markets to have like a lower end hybrid console that's a handheld, and you've got your big box that is indeed top of the flops.
I'd like to see an approach from Microsoft, kind of like you suggested, where you have this low-end device, this handheld, and if that is going to be as central to Microsoft strategy as I think we assume based off of Phil Spencer's constant hints and suggestions, then that would certainly represent a good floor for the device. And then from there, you can scale up, and hopefully there would be a medium-tier console like a Series S, perhaps, than a Series X-like console that is more all-out, or even beyond that, right? Really having the top of the roost, kind of like they had with the One X, where it was just confidently ahead of anything else in the market, even, into the PlayStation 4 Pro and well into, into the current generation. It was still, a powerful machine. So I'd hope that they would have a bit of differentiation, and they wouldn't just say we're going to have the lowest common denominator. But I think based on their messaging, like I think Sarah Bond was talking about having the most powerful hardware leap you've ever seen in Xbox. I think that was the quote, right? That would certainly suggest a device that is not just aiming at the low end of the market for what they're trying to do in home consoles.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the Xbox One X, I don't think it was a massive sales success across the, in view of the entire generation. But what it did do was it continually sent the message that the best place to play these multi-platform games was on Xbox. And I think that's a really powerful message that you shouldn't let go of. And I think, what can I say? I think it's probably the right strategy. Question is it actually going to be a device that's sold in any big volume, or is it going to be more of a Surface style device with more emphasis placed on, we've got all of our games on PC, build your own hardware or get your own pre-built, what do you think, Alex?
Oh my gosh. With regards to talking about their strategy. Gosh. Yeah, with their strategy, to me, it's hard to parse because they're at such a crossroads right now. I know what I would prefer because I play PC games. Like, I do like the idea of this top end box that Oliver mentioned. I also think the idea of a handheld bridges the Steam Deck market and this, as well as the Switch market, which is something that both Microsoft and Sony don't really have purview to. Like, they just don't have access to these. We make wonderful, low cost games that children really love, and also people of all ages really love. I think, it's not just the hardware that's going to have to sell it if you're trying to enter that Switch-like market. It's also like the people love the Switch software, and you have to offer that on the device. On the PC side of things, you kind of get that with the indie AA space. Consoles, there's just maybe smaller of a market there, or it's not so well known. It's really hard to guess at that there. But yeah, I don't know. I feel like that's probably what they're going to do, but I am right now still extremely unsure of how successful that can be, given how much the Xbox brand has suffered in image.
Well, I'll tell you what, Alex, I mean, you may have to buy one of these new Xboxes in order to guarantee that you can actually launch a game.
Yeah, this is true. I need the hardware first before I access the store. This is so true.
Please sort out this store. What's going on? It's going on for years now. How difficult is it to do a launcher? My God. And,
it's awful.
they want to obviously sell Game Pass subscriptions. It really would help if it was, functionally working.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's move on to our next news topic, which, perhaps inevitably is about Microsoft. Okay, so news this week, there's price rises coming to Game Pass. Now, viewed from a sort of meta perspective, this is to be expected, right? Because all subscription services have gone up. Let's not forget that PlayStation put like a gigantic price rise onto PlayStation Plus. However, let's just say that the messaging around Game Pass is somewhat confusing. So what's happening is that there's going to be, the whole point of a lot of Game Pass marketing has been play day one on Game Pass, but Microsoft is going to be introducing a Game Pass tier at $14.99, I believe, that does not offer day one games. Crucially, it doesn't tell you when you are going to be able to play those games. So, is it a month? Is it 3 months? Is it 6 months? Is it a year? Kind of think we need some clarity there. The aim seems to be to move people on to Game Pass Ultimate, which is now going up to $20. I believe it was 17 or 18 prior.
17, I think, yeah.
17, okay. So that's a significant price increase. But, viewed within the overall landscape of price rises across subscription services, I can see that. And obviously there's going to be Call of Duty and Activision Blizzard games arriving. Okay, meanwhile, on the PC side of things, there is a price increase happening to PC Game Pass, but it's still going to be just $11.99 in order to access the day one games. So it's going to be cheaper than the console Game Pass that doesn't offer it. Mm-hmm. And again, this is sending out, I'm sure there are reasons for doing it. Simply from a strategic perspective, maybe Microsoft doesn't feel that PC users will absorb, that sort of level of increase in price. And that's why it did it. However, what this means is that the message being sent out clearly is that, we seem to be favoring the PC user over the console user. It's further diminishing, seemingly how Microsoft is viewing the console audience. Have I got that right or wrong, Oliver?
I think it's just about right. Geez, what do I say about this? Well, I'll be a bit more positive, because I think at some point, if you're going to add the Activision Blizzard titles to Game Pass, and we've not seen that. I think outside of Diablo 4, which was in May, I think, we've not seen that. But presumably these titles are going to be added. We know that the next Call of Duty is going to be on Game Pass. We know that I think there was a leak that in August we're going to see titles like Crash Bandicoot come out on Game Pass. Presumably they have some staggered rollout to keep people interested. That's quite something, getting like the new Call of Duty every year. I think a lot of people are interested in that. There are other Activision games besides Call of Duty, if you can believe it or not very many of them these days, but there certainly are some in the catalog. And then of course a lot of Blizzard titles that people are very interested in. So I think that is compelling. Personally, I would love it if they did introduce some more older titles, some more older Activision titles, some more older Blizzard titles. Yeah. I'd love it if they did more ports. I'd love it if they did more remakes, like, the older Black Ops titles, like Black Ops 2 is a classic. If they did a remake of Black Ops 2 in line with what they did with Modern Warfare 1 and Modern Warfare 2, or the 2007 Modern Warfare and the 2009 Modern Warfare, I should say, because the names are confusing. Maybe even some console ports of Blizzard games like Hearthstone, even again like World of Warcraft. I play World of Warcraft all the time on a controller. Those are interesting titles that you could bring over to possibly expand the, those games which have their own monetization programs, and so could bring in more income for them beyond just the increase in Game Pass users. I don't think that Activision Blizzard has done a great job historically of exploiting their older game catalog. They tend to move on to newer games. They really want people's focus to be on the new Call of Duty every year. That seems like a constant focus of theirs. So they don't tend to dilute that focus with other Call of Duty efforts or other titles, except for like a couple things like the Crash Bandicoot revival recently. There hasn't been too much of the Tony Hawk revival that was seemingly a little bit short-lived. So I think there could be more movement there, some more interesting stuff there to justify the price. I don't think the price increase is unreasonable in that light. Do I love it? No. But, that kind of seems like the way things are going. And I think that, Activision Blizzard does add a lot of value.
Yeah, sure. But it seems that the price rise for PC isn't really changing that much. Plus the day one stuff is still happening on PC. Yeah. A much cheaper price point. I'm just wondering, if the future of Xbox is essentially that it's going to be, kind of more PC adjacent, how's this pricing going to adjust then? I guess that's a discussion for another day. Mm-hmm. Thoughts on this one, Alex?
Well, I mean, just the whole. I mean, if you're like Oliver said, someone who just really loves Call of Duty and you have your couple of games, I guess this is something that is a plus for you because now you're getting it at an overall somewhat cheaper price over a year's time, maybe, of buying the yearly game. Because you always buy the yearly game and maybe the DLC and Battle Pass, etc. I don't know.
I think you'd still need to buy those.
Well, in that case, then I don't know necessarily what it's about. Maybe you get it a couple of days early. Either way, I think, though, this is just showing like what I think is often ignored when people talk about consoles is just like the investment cost of software on the console side of things, unless you're buying physical used months later all the time, which I don't think is the standard consumer, is that you're just kind of getting into a software trap where that you're taken as the sucker at that point. And this kind of feels like that to me, where the PC user is either not interested enough or too savvy to pay extra for this. And that's what I think that's about, because Microsoft, they probably have not made inroads to capturing a great audience size on PC. If they did, they would have no problem with raising the price, I feel. Kind of like they know people are already captured in their service and they want it. It's like how Netflix works. They know people won't give it up, so they increase the price and they get more out of it. And in this case, I feel like since they haven't made that captured audience on PC, they need to keep the price low enough to actually still keep enticing people to try it out. And that, to me, I don't know what that necessarily shows overall, but I think it just makes the deal for getting a console over time now looking worse and worse. So if you are interested in getting a console and Game Pass, maybe double take and think about the smaller, less expensive PC option at some point if you're also interested in Game Pass. But that doesn't mean the Game Pass on PC is going to be great, though, because I can talk about my own experience. Like, Game Pass requires the Xbox app and or use of Microsoft Store, but it actually does require the Xbox app, I think, most often, because that is where you see the full listing of available Game Pass games really easily. On the store, you have to just search the name of the game, I'm pretty sure, and if it is a part of Game Pass, then you can click install. But getting things to show up from searching on the store isn't very convenient. But for using the Xbox app itself, as I talked about on the program before, just maybe 10, 15 minutes ago, I've had a lot of issues with getting Game Pass games running on PC. So they just sometimes don't start, or the install doesn't start, or the download kind of stops midway is another thing that's happened in the past to me. And unfortunately, UI is not nearly descriptive or responsive enough to give you a great idea as a user, especially if you're a casual user. You know, like for me, I'll like immediately go into Control Alt Delete, my brain task manager, and I'll see actually if my internet connection is being utilized in a large way, or if the app is just blown apart. So I know to look for things, but the average user wouldn't necessarily know that, and you could sit there for like 2-3 hours wondering why the game wasn't installed. I just don't think it's very reliable system currently at the moment, PC Game Pass. So yeah, at the moment, I think it's them treating two consumers for a similar product in vastly different ways, kind of taking advantage of the console user and really being a lot more respectful to the PC user. But at the same time, the PC user experience for Game Pass is decidedly poorer than the Xbox One. So I don't think that's why they're pricing it the way they are, though.
I think the way it works is that there's two separate markets here, which you correctly identify, Alex. And there have been certain precedents established on console whereby they charge more for you over time in a way that's simply not possible on PC. This concept that you pay for access to online console multiplayer, for example, Microsoft does it, Sony does it, and it just would never fly on PC, right? This concept of Game Pass $11.99 a month for PC users, it could possibly be a just a different mindset for the PC user, more akin to the idea that ownership is a bit more important, that actually having a library of games that may have been built up over time on Steam, for example, actually has a lot of value. And the fact that Steam do a pretty masterful job with their sales, to the point where people buy games that they never play.
Oh, yeah.
Or, obviously the stack of, the backlog, as we call it. Why should I be paying $12 a month for access to more games when, I've got this historical pile up of really good titles that, I can play at any given point, and the games actually launch.
Right.
I'm going to keep hammering this. The idea that you've got a launcher that doesn't launch is astonishing. It's astonishing. And I just think it's a completely different audience. Obviously, of course, you've got Epic Games as well, literally giving away games. If you've got an Amazon Prime subscription, you're being given games. So I think the concept of, it all comes down to those day one titles that are therefore for PC. So it's got to be included in that $12 tier. And, you've got to have a great run of great titles to consistently keep people on that tier. I'd say that it's been a bit patchy. The lineup going forward looks great for Microsoft, but right now, we've had Hellblade 2 and not much else
this year. Yeah.
Yeah. So I can see why they've had to sort of restrain themselves for PC. But it really, the messaging I'm getting from this is like, okay, we really want to sort of maximize value from our Xbox audience. But at the same time, equally it's saying, well, maybe you should be getting a PC. It's just really, really bizarre. And it's all part of this painful transition period I think the Xbox business is going through at the moment, where there's so many things where the optics just don't look great, but I think when you look at things across the longer term, it will probably turn out to be the right call. Similarly, I think you mentioned this, Oliver. We had the story from Tom Warren this week that Microsoft is considering, or may even being, pulling out marketing for Xbox consoles in Europe. The story sounds plausible to me because historically mainland Europe hasn't been a stronghold for Xbox, and I can imagine it's been even more diminished in the Series era. But I'm curious what you think about that, Oliver.
I think it's tough because Xbox Series sales are not so good. From what I understand, in Europe, for the most part, PlayStation is a very dominant platform, whereas in like the North American market, Xbox historically has been pretty even with PlayStation, or even ahead of it during like the 360 era. I think in the UK it might be the case also that the Xbox is comparatively doing a little bit better.
Yeah, that goes all the way back to 360, by the way.
Yeah, but certainly in recent times it's not been nearly as positive. I don't know, shifting the emphasis to Game Pass, I guess, makes a little bit more sense in markets where you don't really have that install base of Xbox consoles and you aren't expecting to make inroads. You might as well try a different approach. Again, I think it just comes back to like the Xbox with an Xbox concept where, this is a great idea. I think works great in the boardroom, but in an actual living room or on a phone, it's not quite as positive of an experience at the moment. So I think they just need to brush it up and make that actually a good experience for players. And then maybe it'll be a more enticing offer, but at the same time, they're also increasing the price of the Game Pass. So maybe that is a little bit
PC,
of a prospect.
I'm sure that's pretty big in mainland Europe. So the concept of possibly shifting your marketing towards Game Pass as opposed to a console, I think it kind of makes sense. Hashtag just saying.
Mm-hmm.
All right, with that, let's move on to our next news topic. Okay, next up, let's talk about Black Myth Wukong. There's a recent preview beat. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it to that, but NVIDIA has announced further details about its marketing tie-up. It looks as though we are indeed going to be getting full RT in this really exciting game. A blog post from NVIDIA this week, which showed a single asset, which seemed to be a screenshot showing, described as RTX on off. And we also saw some benchmarks, which people are saying look pretty heavy. But I'm looking at the graphing now, and it kind of looks as expected for a full path tracing game. But Alex, what do you think about this? Let's talk about the asset first of all.
Oh yeah, sure. So with regards to the asset, I think Oliver can also say something about this. the full RT mantra and or path tracing that NVIDIA talks about has so far that we've seen it in games that are not really UE5 ones. And so for something like Alan Wake 2, they already had RT in the game, and then they extended it so that all lighting, for the most part, is done via RT. And that requires a certain amount of like intensity. It's very expensive to run. It also requires some things behind the scenes on the engine side to get it working. And in this screenshot here, two of them from Black Myth Wukong, there's one with the typical rendering from UE5. So it's probably Lumen and VSMs for shadows combined with Nanite if it's using proper UE5. And then whatever the NVIDIA RTX renderer is, including things like, you can see it on the water. I think that's the larger difference regarding the water, among other things, is that you can see caustics rendering. So light filtering through the water like crests and undulating as it filters through on the bottom. It's like the water splits, the light, and it filters through, and you can see it like making a shimmer on the bottom of the ground through the backside of the water. And that's really cool looking. We don't see that too often in games. It's like a hacky way to do it. But it creates very cool effects. I saw it in oh my god, Sword and Fairy 7, as well as a couple other titles. So UE4 based titles using that NVIDIA branch.
Isn't it in that Chernobyl game? Chernobyl.
It was also Chernobylite. They used it they didn't use it really so much for water usually, but they used it oddly enough for glass a lot, which was really cool. I actually liked that. Presumably they'll be doing the same thing with Black Myth Wukong in a couple of areas of the game, depending on how the art is set up. But another thing it should do is it should change, presumably, how Lumen is done. It'll be using whatever form of Lumen that is in the NVRTX renderer there, as well as the shadows should now be ray traced instead of shadow map ray tracing, which is once again like another hack. But Oliver, you pointed out some very interesting things about the differences in the lighting in these screenshots.
Yeah, I just noticed on like the left-hand log, there are two kind of logs that are in the water in this shot. And on the left-hand log in the RTX off view, you do see some reflection of the small branches, these very fine branches there. In the RTX on view, not as much. And then on the right-hand side, on that log, in the RTX on view, the log appears to be the wrong color. It appears white, almost like it's kind of textureless, colorless. And then in the RTX off view, it's reflected in the water with the right color. So, you know, I'm sure Alex will talk about this, but presumably in the RTX off view, we're seeing a screen space reflection here because, you know, that information is on screen. And that's how Lumen works. So in this case, I'd assume that's SSR information. We're just not getting the RTX on view because presumably they aren't resorting to any kind of screen space tricks at all. So yeah, that is the point of some interest in these NVIDIA comparisons. Sometimes we do note, like I think with Naraka Blade Point a few months ago, some omissions in that DVH that maybe are showing up in these comparisons and not flattering as much as you'd think that RTX on view, that, you know, in NVIDIA's new terminology, that full ray traced view, that path traced view. So that's just something to point out. Maybe that's something they can change or revise ahead of launch, but that is just something to note.
Yeah, I think it's important to note because this is our first UE5 title with this full ray tracing using the NVIDIA branch. And the question I've always had with regards to UE5 and implementing ray tracing, path tracing in it, is that Nanite makes it complex to have the full fidelity object on screen in the ray tracing view, so that what is usually actually being ray traced against is like a lower fidelity version of the model. In software Lumen, for example, it's just like this amorphous blob, or it's just not there at all. In hardware Lumen, it's like a low triangle mesh, probably not with transparency. And then, so what the question for me was, okay, how does NVIDIA solve this issue? Do they eat the performance and just have it be like Alan Wake 2 style, where every single thing that is ray traced against is actually, the geometry is actually put into the BVH so that you get that one-to-one look, which is what is necessary for path tracing to work correctly and be physically accurate all the time? Or do you have compromises? And I'm very curious, based on this screenshot here, it seems like something isn't right. based upon the things that Oliver says, and I don't think that's a good win, because when you turn on higher end graphical options, I always feel like they should just improve the image altogether at a performance cost. You shouldn't be finding then bad edge case scenarios or all the time scenarios where it looks worse for some reason. And I think that's usually my like inner thought about higher end settings. They shouldn't make the game look worse in some way. I mean, I think that makes sense to most people. You're paying all this extra, performance. Might as well have it look better for everything. So here, I really do hope this is just some anomaly in the screenshot they put out, and that the end, product, whatever it may be, does actually have like a really great one-to-one geometry that is being ray traced against versus what you can see in the primary view. Otherwise, it kind of makes, you may get great things like the caustics, you may get better indirect lighting, you may get technically more accurate shadows, but if objects are like missing from them, or the reflections, like you look in a reflection and it's like this like low detail model, and it's like, okay. It takes away from the luster, to say the least. And especially if the performance. We can also talk about the performance here, where this actually, performance-wise, it reminds me quite a bit of Cyberpunk, based upon everything they've shown here. Like, I imagine the RTX 4090 in 4K DLSS performance mode without DLSS 3 is just like right on 60 FPS based upon this right here. Because that's why since it's so GPU limited, when you turn on frame gen, it isn't a 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 increase in frame rate. They show like around a little bit over 100 FPS here with DLSS 3 frame gen on. So that puts it right in line with other path choice titles, I would say. The one thing that, I don't like it that they do this in these performance previews, these little bar charts, is that they include frame generation with the DLSS, the DLSS over the previous generation. So they show like the 3090 and the 3080, I believe, as well in here. And they just show it with super resolution on. And it gives you a different impression, I would say. And I think they should always have the bar chart be split. Yep. They should have it show
100%.
They should show what it is with super resolution, and then maybe the bar graph increases on top of it with the frame gen. I think that's much more accurate to what the consumer expects.
Absolutely, yeah. I think this has been mentioned ad nauseum in the past. And to be fair, in their reviewers' guides, I believe, and in other benchmarks they have done exactly that, which is to show the increase with super resolution, and then, the bar extends with what frame generation gives you, which kind of makes sense. One thing, as I said, there's nothing really surprising from my perspective about the benchmarks that are being presented here. Something that does slightly look curious to me, if you look at the 1440p graph that they've got there, 3080 and 4070. 4070 is typically on par or slightly slower than the 3080. So yeah, it looks like there's a lot of heavy lifting either being done by frame generation or by the architectural improvements, or both, which is another reason why we kind of need that split bar chart there. But the gain that I'm seeing from 3080 to 4070, even factoring in DLSS 3, looks quite big.
Yeah, it reminds me when I did the update video on Alan Wake 2, covering their patch that made it so that the game runs better without mesh shaders. I looked at the performance difference, I believe, between the RTX 3080 and RTX 4070, or maybe I'm actually thinking about my launch video where I did optimize settings. Either way, in that I saw that if you had just rasterization on, the 3070 was being beaten out by the 3080 by a little bit. But if you turned on any of the path tracing, I think it was like 30% faster on the RTX 4070. It was some large enough number. It was like 31 FPS versus like 40 or something like that on the 4070 there at 1440p. So if this is that case, then there's a lot of architectural things that make the 4070 way better at path tracing. And I'm hoping that Black Myth Wukong is using them. One thing that I'm very curious, like we saw already in games before, the opacity micromaps being used, which is a way to prevent, so in a game when there's transparency being traced on screen, the way DirectX does it usually is it invokes an any hit shader to test kind of in a non-great hardware accelerated way where on a texture there's like a 0 value or a 1 value to see if it's opaque or not. And this is expensive, and invoking it is like awful, and you try and avoid that in games with ray tracing. And opacity micromaps get around that by essentially having, I'm pretty sure, like a higher res, like it takes the places where it would be transparent and it doesn't even include them at all, and it takes the place where it's opaque and it makes actually a geometric mesh out of it, and it tests against that instead. So it doesn't invoke any hit shaders. Basically, it makes it faster because it's not having to do some sort of workaround to cover transparency. That's one tech we've already seen right now in Cyberpunk, as well as I'm pretty sure we also see it in Alan Wake 2. But there's another tech that NVIDIA has that is basically for covering ultra dense geometric models. I want to say it's called DMM. It's another acronym that whose exact words I forget at this very moment when I'm trying to say this, but it's basically a model for covering really dense geometric meshes and having them be ray traceable on GPUs. And it only is supported by Ada Lovelace. And I don't think we've seen that in any game so far. And it seems like a great use case for UE5 because UE5 allows for ultra dense meshes geometry via nanite. So I'm curious if this is going to be one of the first games we're seeing that. I'm curious to see, like Oliver pointed out in the screenshot, like, are they going to have it just have like worse aspects when you turn on path tracing? I hope not. You know, there's a lot of things that we're going to only see middle of August. I think this game is an August 20th release.
I think so. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so that's like right when games comes around. I hope I get it like a week and a half ahead of there's a lot of things. Have a dream, Alex. Yeah, I have a dream. I would love to get PC releases. You know, like when you get like a Sony release like 2 weeks ahead of time because they're so confident in the product. Yeah. Would love that if that happened on PC occasionally, but it's usually like I get a day off or something like that.
I've got one more note of interest about these benchmarks, Alex, which is the 4K ones with the higher end GPUs are tested with performance mode, seemingly. Right. DLSS performance mode with frame generation. The 1440p ones are actually on quality mode, which basically means that the base resolution for the 4K one would be 1080p. And the base resolution for the 1440p benchmarks on the weaker GPU would be something like, 964p or something like that?
Around that.
So the base resolution isn't actually that vastly different.
I guess performance here is all just like the things that are done at full res at this point. So post-processing.
Yeah, that's going to be impactful for sure. But certainly a curious state of affairs. The thing is, 1440p DLSS, as you showed in your recent video, the balance mode is actually pretty good.
It's pretty awesome. In fact, it's so awesome that after playing I did all that B-roll in 1440p FSR 3.1 balance mode, and I was like, like while playing it on my larger screen, I was like, it doesn't look that great. But then I switched to DLSS, and I was like, oh, this is very smooth presentation. I think. Especially I have like the worst case scenario for looking at DLSS at 1440p because it's like a large screen right in front of my face. But I think like if you're on like an average 24 to 27 inch monitor or something like that, you have like a really great 1440p experience there.
Mm-hmm. Okay, fair enough. Good stuff. Let's move on. Okay, next up, a really interesting thing that popped up online this week. I'm loving this. There seems to be this kind of like, how can I describe it? People seem to like taking the OG Xbox and just like ripping out its components and replacing them with better components. And Alex pointed out this video from Retro Renegade Repairs, where they've basically swapped out the original Celeron x86 chip in the OG Xbox for something better. And, this joins a litany of upgrades that we've seen for the OG Xbox, ranging from, faster memory, etc., etc. More memory, I think. I might be wrong there. But Alex, this video caught your eye.
Well,
tell us why.
There's a lot of reasons why. First of all, the presentation, I've watched a number of the videos that this gentleman puts out on his channel. They're just, I really like this like chill, we're going to do this thing and you follow me along. And he seems to really love working with hardware and doing all the nitty gritty, like, I mean, this is hand workmanship at this point. This is the equivalent of a carpenter working, just with, like a different medium. And I find it fascinating to watch him do all these things and comment on the side about it. So I think the presentation values are incredible, actually, in this video. They're very relaxed, really good. But the things that he's doing in a variety of the videos, the one, in this specific one, it's actually about putting a socket on the motherboards to allow for essentially plug and play CPU installation on an Xbox using the variety of, I think, from Coppermine up architectures, Pentium 3 based CPUs. So in this case, it is a bit of a novelty because if you just put in the fastest one you want, then that's great. Just put in the fastest one. You will never need to essentially replace it again. The Pentium or the Celeron-based CPU in the OG Xbox is like 700-esque megahertz. And then on the PC side of things, Coppermine and above went from, it was like 500, I think was the slowest, maybe 450 was the slowest, all the way up to eventually with the PGA 370 boards, you could get dedicated CPUs that were 1.4, maybe even there was a canceled 1.5 gigahertz one that, it was taped out, but you can probably find it on like AliExpress or something like that. I have no idea. But basically the whole deal is that these type of mods extend the power of the Xbox. Since it was like a DirectX based system, usually plugging and playing in faster hardware still allows it to run as long as it's the same architecture. And in this case, plugging in a faster CPU will increase the frame rates actually in a lot of games that are CPU limited. Curiously though, it won't help them all, especially in a lot of cases, because the GPU was one of the first GPUs that supported pixel shaders, and that is a bottleneck at some point. Also, the original Xbox being unified memory architecture, the speed and latency of the memory is extremely important for its performance. So you can have cases where that is another bottleneck, just the speed of the memory. And in that case, there are actually mods to, I believe, increase the speed of the memory, not by necessarily installing in faster chips, but by overclocking them if they allow it, if I recall correctly, and that'll help too. But I want to just point out this channel because I like highlighting people that do really cool work. And in this case, I think this work that this person is doing is awesome. He's not the only person out there doing these type of upgrades, but this is the first time I've ever seen someone put literally just like a dock, PC desktop socket on an Xbox motherboard. And I think it's awesome. And I really want one of these. Like, I would love to make a video that's showing off the difference in essentially what is an OG Xbox's performance in this game versus the upgraded one. And you could find, it's kind of like when you did like the Switch overclocking bit stuff, Rich. Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like that exact same level of fascination. And in the original Xbox's case, there's a lot of games that are really cool, but still have like performance issues. Yeah. So it'd be cool to iron those out.
And fair dues to Retro Renegade Repairs. He's done some comparisons here of 733 megahertz, which is like the base, 1 gigahertz and 1.4 gigahertz. And he's got examples where, there's no frame rate counters here, by the way. You can just see the difference.
Yes, I like that.
It's there's no like 10% differentials here. It's just you can just see it's a lot smoother. The Half-Life 2 example in particular is
it's the best one.
Is striking, yeah. Yeah, I'd love to actually be able to, check out an OG Xbox that has the HDMI mod and then this Xbox with an HDMI mod, because it would just plug into our existing workflow. It'd be great.
It'd be so amazing. And I'm pretty sure he also does the HDMI modding, if I'm not mistaken. And there's a lot of other things he does on his channel. So this is just another creator out there that I highly recommend watching, especially if you're just in a chill mood. It's kind of got like that LGR vibe where it's like really soft-spoken and nice.
Yeah, Retro Renegade Repairs, 6.66k subscribers. That's not enough. Let's go there. Let's support this guy. Let's put a link in the video description below, as we like to say. Oliver, thoughts?
Yeah, it looks interesting. I mean, one infamous port that I actually played back in the day, Half-Life 2. Looks like it's running on Xbox quite a lot better at 1 gigahertz and 1.4 gigahertz.
Yeah.
So that's definitely a boost. Most Xbox games are okay performance-wise. They're not too many really bad ones. I think the biggest difference probably will come in emulation, where the N64 emulation seems faster. I'm sure emulation of all kinds of systems in the Xbox seems faster. For my money, though, the original Xbox is not the best Xbox done for emulation. You know, a Series S or Series X in developer mode is a very capable machine, obviously, relative to that. But obviously, you know, Xbox emulation was like a huge thing back in the day, and it's nice to see it operating better. But I know that people have been upgrading their Xbox CPUs for a while. Generally, I hear of the 1 gigahertz upgrade. That seems like it's not enormously uncommon. 1.4 gigahertz, though, is new to me. It does seem like a pretty regimented process at this point, though, with the custom interposer and all that are already available. People seem to know what they're doing with this stuff.
It's awesome.
But it does seem really cool. And for sure, I think if Alex could get his hands on one of these, that would be a very interesting video.
Yeah, and speaking of overclocking older consoles, what I've been wanting to do this for a long time, but overclocking RSX in the PlayStation 3.
Oh yeah,
that is doable. I'm not sure I think it's something like 150 megahertz on core, and you can do something to the memory as well. I'd need to check it out. But I'm really interested to see how that would actually have impacted the cross-platform head-to-heads back in the day. You know, an overclocked RSX up against Xenos GPU and Xbox 360. My gut feeling is the Xbox 360 would still be faster, but I'd love to try it out. And also I've heard rumors, and I haven't checked it out. I've just sort of been when I'm doom scrolling, seeing that there's maybe a Brazilian channel that has hardware modded faster memory into Nintendo Switch, and more memory, which I think I'd like to check out as well, given the chance. But yeah, interesting stuff. Console mods, who would have thought? Okay, let's move on. Okay, so last week, I think the First Descendant appeared on consoles and PC. And Tom's actually checking it out now. But I heard that it had FSR3 frame generation added, which makes it the second console title to do so. And, you know, out of curiosity, I thought I'd spend a couple of hours checking it out yesterday I chose the PlayStation 5. This is kind of a bit weird because we know the baseline from AMD where they expect to see frame generation implemented. It starts at 60 frames per second as their recommended minimum, and it goes, and then you basically reap the benefits of whatever frame generation brings from there, which will vary depending on whether you're CPU limited or GPU limited, right? However, Immortals of Avium came along, which had kind of like a 40 to 60 FPS baseline. And, it basically moved into 70 to 90 FPS. The First Descendant has got 3 different graphics modes and fidelity, which locks to 30 FPS without frame generation. It has balanced, which locks to 40 FPS. And then it has a performance mode, which targets 60. And then you can add FSR3 on top of all of those. Even the 30 FPS mode. There's some weirdness going on here. Tom's doing the full coverage. He shared with me some details, such as the fact that you've got dynamic resolution scaling with the FSR3 frame generation off, but it's a static resolution with frame generation on, which means that the balance, you're not quite comparing like with like by turning frame gen on with frame gen off. But even so, I did some assets here. Alex, you've looked at the assets, I presume.
Yes, I have, before I deleted them by accident.
Yeah, they re-downloaded them again. That was great. So here's my perspective. I think it's similar to Avium. It's built with VRR in mind because there's some weird stuff happening with VSync off in terms of frame times. It seems to work best in the performance mode, which is targeting 60 FPS base. But I'm curious what you think of the other modes because, to the eye, it kind of looks, right, but you really shouldn't be. I'm guessing with the 30 FPS fidelity mode, that unlocking the frame rate and then doing the frame generation, unlocking the frame rate, setting the resolution static, and then doing the frame generation.
I mean, I like the idea of them offering choice to the users here and kind of allowing the user to test their own limits of what they find acceptable. Which is kind of what this is an exercise in, especially in the quality mode, like you're describing there. I think the 30 to 60 FPS conversion for FSR3 is something AMD doesn't want people to be doing unnecessarily. So that's why they do that recommendation at 60 FPS. But I guess like we've seen in games such as Flight Simulator, the 30 to 60 FPS conversion experience for latency, meh. But, for visuals, as long as the game isn't moving too much, I think it is actually reasonable. It'll break down rather rapidly otherwise. This is a game, though, based upon what I've seen, both less so in your videos, but just from the general coverage of it, it can be pretty fast. And I think maybe that'll break down even more. But I'm just a little bit more concerned about the performance metrics. So the 30 to 60 FPS conversion for the quality mode, I think, falls short in performance of where you'd really want it to be. So every single bit below 30 FPS is going to just due to, well, you have to be on a VRR screen in the first place, but it's just going to have so much more input latency below 30. And then I think the 40 to 80 situation, or sorry, the base 40 going up, do you say 90, right?
It caps at 90, but it's, looking at the asset, it's typically more in like late 50s to 60s. So it's not that much different from I guess it is faster than the quality mode. But, even so, the base frame rate is still going to be low.
Yeah, so I think the base frame rate situation there is just in terms of arc movement and input latency just not in the right place. Even though it has its, I think it has the right idea in mind. If it was actually a really great, constant 40, then it was brought up to mainly 80 via dynamic resolution, I think that'd be amazing. But I'm not actually sure if the Unreal Engine 5 and FSR in general are good at combining these two things with dynamic resolution. Right now with Immortals of Avium, we've seen that they kind of don't use dynamic resolution, right?
No, they don't use it at all.
Yeah, so maybe it's an issue in that aspect where because maybe FSR3 requires at least a static input resolution for each one, because it's the two frames have to at least be the same. I don't know. Maybe that's the issue. But either way, I would, if you're going to use this, based upon what I've seen, I really think that the performance mode is the way to go on a VRR monitor. But I'm very curious that, like you're saying, the frame times with non-VRR, though, are being weird when it goes lower.
Yeah, I literally just loaded it, played it, captured it. So
yeah.
When you look at the performance mode frame generation, there's some odd blips, but it looks broadly as you'd expect it to look. But on the other two modes, it does look odd. So I'm curious to check out what's going to happen with those modes in VRR.
Right.
But it should work, but the frame distribution is slightly odd there. Oliver, any thoughts about this? I mean, I guess one of my takeaways is that, it continues to be the case that the actual quality of the frame generation is pretty good, I'd say.
Yeah, it seems pretty good in the shots that I'm seeing, even in the worst of worst scenarios with a base frame rate of 25 FPS, not so good, but it looks okay. I mean, I'm definitely seeing some artifacts visually by eye, even without going through frame by frame. There's some messiness, some artifacts, especially in fast-moving elements or particle effects or anything like that. Classic FSR3 cases where it's not going to work so well. In general, I have a concern, which is that we're getting too many modes in console games.
Right.
Because console titles historically have been about giving you a really well-optimized experience out of the box without too many tweaks. And I really worry that the pursuit of all these visual modes and toggles might help to obfuscate some performance issues and also mislead players. And in every case, these modes have to be have to be good. I think they have to be good. So I would really rather they kept the modes simpler and had maybe one mode with frame generation, a couple other modes maybe without frame generation, something like that, instead of offering it as a toggle for all visual modes. Because I think in most cases I would take a bit of a softer image over an image with very obtrusive frame gen artifacts, which I think you're going to get at these lower frame rates. And if a game can do 50 FPS with frame gen, that's a very low base frame rate. Certainly, when you look at AMD's messaging, they're advertising, you should go to 60 and then do frame gen. What we've seen, you can have good results in games with a little bit more artifacting with like a 40 FPS base frame rate. Here with like a 25 FPS base frame rate, I mean, I haven't played it myself, but I can't imagine it's a brilliant experience. So I'd really rather that developers focus on a couple discrete modes without too many toggles, because ultimately the average player who boots this up, probably they're just going to stick to the default option, right? They're not going to tweak it too much. But if you give players tools to change things, don't give them too many tools to mess things up, because otherwise I just think at that point you might as well just expose the settings menu. Just, because what's the point? You're giving players the options that are not optimal in that case. So I would just prefer that, you give players a more limited variety of options, and also, selfishly, I don't want to cover 12 modes in a console game. Sometimes I do have to cover a lot of modes. I don't want to cover that many modes.
Tom did offer to be on the Direct today, but there's so many modes in First Descendant that he's got his work cut out for him, so it's probably not fair to have him on. But I mean, I guess my one, I think, I'm going to test it on VRR, and assuming that, frame delivery is fine, it's probably a good value add, right? I guess my worry here, my concern here is that similar to FSR2 spatial upscaling, we know where it works well. We know where it doesn't work well. And, with spatial upscaling, when we had the launch of Immortals of Avium at 720p scaling up to 4K, it didn't look great. That was not what AMD intended FSR spatial upscaling to be used for. And yet there it was rather. And here we're seeing that AMD's recommendations for frame generation, base 60 FPS, well, maybe, 40 FPS does work fine. In some scenarios. I mean, it works pretty well in Avium, I'd say, and it seems to be okay here, but to offer frame generation on your base 30 FPS mode, possibly not the best option. And, when these experiments start to become standard practice, I think that's where we're heading in a bad direction, I think.
Right.
Yeah, but interesting nonetheless, and great to see frame generation actually implemented on more than one game, which says to me that it's not going to be a flash in the pan, that we are going to see more games get FSR3 frame gen, which I'm broadly in favour of. And also it's a toggle. It's not being enforced on anyone, which again I think is essential for that technology, certainly in this early emergent stage. But I guess wait until Tom's full analysis is complete. He's certainly got his work cut out for him.
Poor man.
I mean, three consoles, three different modes, frame gen on off. That's mad.
Yeah, for a released live service style game, so probably patching in there. I don't want to cover that.
And it's hard to get like for like as well.
Yeah, these type of games.
There are some cutscenes in there, which is how I did that head to head. But I'm not sure it is a valid head to head, because you've got DRS on one side and static resolution. It's like dynamic resolution on one side, dynamic frame rate on the other. Which is certainly an interesting turn of events. But with that, let's move on. A final news topic of the week. We squeezed this one in at the last minute because we checked it out and we actually thought, wow, this is pretty good and possibly, I think definitely actually worthy of a full video. But let's get straight to it. Ace Combat 7, which is one of John's favourite games, has actually arrived on Nintendo Switch. Unreal Engine game. There were some concerns about the quality of the port. Oliver and I have played it. Oliver, what are your thoughts? Because I actually think it's a really good port based on what I've seen so far.
Yeah, overall, I think it's quite a good conversion, at least from what I've played so far. I've played a couple hours so far. It renders at 720p at 30 FPS in dock mode. I've also played it portably. It looks pretty respectable there, but I did not get a count yet on that one. No calamitous frame rate drops. It looks very consistent to me. I only spotted one or two when I was like going through some very heavy explosions. So just really momentary dips there. Possibly with no AA, maybe with a lighter post-process AA. But it's actually kind of interesting because if you compare this to the console versions, at least from what John covered back in 2019, the Xbox One version is also 720p. With post-process AA, and it aimed for 60, but it did not do a good job of hitting 60. So this is one of those cases where the Switch is actually measuring up pretty well in the top-line figures against the console versions. But I think the key thing here is that all the gameplay elements that are really critical here and critical to the game's visual makeup are presented. So you get draw distance for the terrain that stretches all the way out into the distance. You don't have any like pop-in, really obtrusive pop-in for the terrain elements. You do get some pop-in for the trees and stuff like that. That's pretty obvious, but not for large masses of land, which is obviously important when you have a draw distance that stretches, potentially kilometers away. And you get very nice volumetric clouds, which are a pretty critical aspect of Ace Combat 7. Very nice clouds. I would say absolutely the best looking clouds on Switch. I don't think there's any question there. So if you're tallying that one up, I think these are absolutely the best clouds on Switch. Very good looking volumetric clouds with not too many artifacts to them, and they're lit properly by the sun, and they have that nice shadowing beneath them. They look like proper volumetric clouds, some of the best you'll see in games, I'm sure. The explosions are impactful and screen filling, and the lighting looks pretty good. They're using shadow maps. They aren't cutting out anything too obtrusive, so it's not been stripped to the bone or anything like that. Looks pretty solid overall. Relative to the other console versions, I've not played them myself, but just judging from some footage, the draw distance has been pulled in quite a bit for things like trees. Again, not the critical elements, but like little incidental details along the world. They do seem to be drawing in a lot closer to the camera. Some of the lighting has been simplified, I think. Maybe they've stripped back materials a bit. It's running on Unreal Engine 4, but it doesn't have quite as much of that UE4 look to it. I think they might be simplifying some of the material properties, stripping back some material layers, something like that. Overall, though, it looks pretty good, running pretty well. I'm satisfied with it so far. I'll need to do more comparisons directly with the last gen console versions, probably Xbox One. But so far, I'm quite pleased with it. It's a very good conversion, I think.
Yeah,
Cool.
Alex, you've seen the footage, right?
Yeah, I did. And I thought it looks pretty great. It looked like Ace Combat to me, based on my memories of John's
Always a good
video.
start.
Which is, well, it's better than, I think of...
Yeah, I know what you're saying.
Yeah. Any of the other UE4 conversions we've seen, like the original Arc or Outer
the original
Worlds,
No Man's Sky as well.
Original No Man's Sky,
Yeah.
where it's like if you were to like really squint your eyes, you'd be seeing it. But then if you like open your eyes, you're like, oh my goodness, this actually looks good. And I think based upon Oliver's little preview here, consistent performance is pretty important, as well as maintaining the clouds, which is probably like the headline feature of the game's visuals next to the craft and the explosions. So I think that's awesome. I'm just very curious to see if it is using dynamic res, I'm always curious now in this almost before cross-gen territory for Switch 2, like what does this look like on the Switch 2? Since it's such a late release on Switch, do they patch it for Switch 2 when it comes out? I'm just very curious about those things that we still have no idea about.
Yeah, I do remember, Alex, just prior to filming this, you just said, has it still got the clouds in there? Has it still got the volumetric clouds in there? So
It's the most important thing.
And then Oliver was basically saying, yeah, best clouds on Switch. It does look great though. I played it handheld, and there were some aliasing artifacts, and it's visibly low res handheld, but it still played great and looked great. I think it just looks really, really cool, and it is a great game. So I think we're going to have to do a full video on this, because I just think it's fantastic, and titles like this should be highlighted. But certainly, first impressions pretty great, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's very positive. I've taken a look at some other UE4 titles on Switch. I remember Hogwarts Legacy back in the day,
Right.
not so good. But this is a very different kind of UE4 game where they were targeting 60 FPS on the consoles already. It's a very different scale, but also, they're not using some key technologies in there that you might see in other games because of that scale. So maybe that's helping them out a little bit.
Right.
So yeah, it looks really, really good. I'm excited to play more. One thing I am a little bit worried about, though, is I know in John's coverage he did note that the game does get heavier as it goes on. So
Right.
it could very well be the case that in some of these later missions, there's a little bit more difficulty with the frame rate. I will have to check for dynamic res in there as well. But so far, so good. I think it's a good port.
Lovely. Okay, brilliant. Let's move on. It's time now for Supporter Q&A, which is the part of the show where every week I post on our Patreon saying, hey, got any questions or topics we want to discuss? We take a look at that the day after, choose the best or other the ones we're best equipped to answer. And here we go. We're going to kick off with this question from Leftist Hominid. If a PC gamer that heavily used Game Pass asked you which PC handheld you would recommend in the here and now, what would you recommend? This is kind of like we've got a history of handheld questions from Leftist Hominids that typically want to steer us away from recommending the Steam Deck series.
Yeah.
And it is, I think it's fair to say that Game Pass is very difficult to get running on Steam Deck. If not impossible. There's no Game Pass client, is there? I don't know. But it generally points you towards the Windows handhelds out there. I've got my views on this, but Oliver, what do you think?
I think that for me, and maybe this is a bit biased because this is what I own, but I like the ROG Ally, or the ROG Ally. I don't know what the correct, I know the correct terminology is ROG. I'm just going to say ROG. I think the ROG Ally X might be a better choice, just judging from the way that the ergonomics look on that device and the battery life. It certainly seems like a superior device to me. I haven't used the other Windows devices myself, but I do know that the interface for Armoury Crate is pretty good. Has good support from ASUS from what I've seen so far. The overall build and specs are very solid, and I think it's the only device with a VRR screen. I think that's correct.
Yes, I think you're right.
And that is very important, I think, especially when you're dealing with issues that are just related to having to kind of balance that load without dynamic res in PC titles, especially with such a low power chipset. I think it just... VRR is a great solution to that problem. Obviously, you can cap the frame rate at a low level, but that's often not the best choice. That's often not the best solution. So I think having a VRR screen is really important for that, especially when you're dealing with like 1080p with a 7840U, or in that device, I suppose they brand it as a Z1 Extreme, but it's just not an ideal situation without it. The MSI Claw is sort of trash, from what I understand. That's not so good. And then there are a lot of other 7840U and 8840U devices that you can look at. The 1X players, the Aya devices, all kinds of different things. They all have their plus and minus points, but I think the Ally is probably the canonical Windows handheld at this point, and probably for good reason. I'd also suggest, possibly, depending on your preferences, because people have different preferences, this is maybe not so much for the Game Pass players, but I think the Steam Deck LCD can make for an interesting Windows device. I have Windows installed on my Deck LCD at the moment. For certain kinds of games that get a lot of mileage out of trackpads, like I like playing MMOs on it. You can play games like StarCraft on it if you're really a little crazy. I think that's a viable choice. But specifically the Deck LCD, and not the Deck OLED, because Valve does not yet provide drivers for the Wi-Fi, the audio, or the Bluetooth. The Windows drivers. Unfortunately, those have not been provided. They've said that they're going to be providing them very soon for a while now, but they've not been provided as of yet. So unless you want a very, very compromised experience in Windows, I'd suggest the Deck LCD for that purpose.
No Wi-Fi on a handheld. That's just nuts.
Yeah, not advisable, I would say. Not advisable.
It's not great, is it? I think the thing that kind of throws me on this question is the in the here and now, because the ROG Ally X isn't out.
Yeah.
But, you know, I have got one. It's still over there. It's going back shortly in favour of a production unit. But, yeah, I mean, what do I like about the ROG Ally? It's got the VRR screen, and what can I say? It's so difficult to get games running consistently at 30 FPS or whatever your screen multiples are. And therefore, that VRR screen is worth its weight in gold. The problem I have with the ROG Ally is the battery is just not there, but that's addressed in the ROG Ally X, and you know you get double the battery capacity. So you know, not in the here and now, but the ROG Ally X I think is going to be the device to have for that. I don't really know what else to say. Again, not in the here and now, but I'm willing to bet that Microsoft's handheld device, whatever form it's going to take, is probably going to be really good as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they just can't afford to fumble that. Don't really have a huge amount of experience with handhelds, Alex, but I'm curious what you think about this.
Well, if it was Windows, as this question is forcing us to go, then I would also go with the ROG Ally X, just because I do think all the there are different features that you guys have all collectively mentioned. I feel like they're very important. It's the one, like I always feel like with the OLED, it's like the one missing thing is the VRR. And I feel like it's just such a shame, because it is, I locking a frame rate is important to me. I think even with VRR, I am locking frame rates, but I'm just not worrying then about the minute drops below the VSync threshold.
Yeah.
Presuming they're not hitches or stutters. So I think that's the one thing that is missing. It also allows for great versatility without you having to use the VSync adjustment on OLEDs for, like, if you're using emulation. Not all games in emulation run at 60 hertz, 90 hertz or whatever. Some of them run at oddball refreshes, especially if you're using like MAME or something like that. So, or even DOS emulation. I think it's just a great thing to have as a toolbox thing. So ROG Ally X upon its release.
Okay, good stuff. Let's move on. This question from Wes Oosh, ! He's back. But he's also added to his username now. It's whoosh in brackets. Hi DF team, hope you're all doing great! Just wanted to ask if you're going to be doing more 3-way play videos like the Quake one. I never played Quake before and decided to download it from Game Pass, and now it's one of my favorite video games of all time. Good stuff. Mm-hmm. Chemistry between you three when playing Quake was hilarious and entertaining to watch. Keep up the great work, and oosh. Alex, these 3-way videos, they don't do a huge amount of traffic, but we do like making them. And maybe we should try and make it a bit more supporter centric.
Yeah, I think it would be great to do like a supporter only us video, just really, really basic edit. Just like 3. This is where I wish almost you had AI editing. Excuse me to say I want someone to replace my job, but like the ability to give people like the ability to have like a video with 3 feeds essentially, and just switching based upon user speaking to the feed. That seems like really reasonable things that manually I can do that. Oliver's really great at it too. But like that's something that is spending all your time editing that up when it's mainly just about us talking. It's kind of funny. But
there are some tools to do that actually. With Premiere, I know there's one, but to me it just seems like, well, if you just play it at twice speed and switch it yourself is my opinion.
Yeah, right. You can totally do that. Yeah,
switching is not the part of editing that takes a long time usually. So.
Yeah, this is true. I always feel actually like for me, just kind of like setting up the project, like just like little basic bits of the project, also backgrounds, etc. But in this case, I would love to do it. In fact, I've had a couple of dream videos. One thing that I actually have here that I purposely keep acquiring things because I want it to happen one day is I keep acquiring more PhysX cards because I want us in the eventuality of time to do where we all play Cell Factor video together, because it's an arena based PhysX shooter, and it's a complete time capsule. It only really works on old PCs. So if Rich and John and I ever meet in Berlin, I want us all to come back to my place and we record us playing a PhysX multiplayer game together as a joke. I've wanted to do that. Also, I think we should probably do some more retro PC 3-way videos. We've done 2-way ones, quite a lot of John and I, but I think the 3-way ones are also special. It just requires a game that has at least a unique enough, usually PS2 version or Xbox version or GameCube version. And not all of them always do, but there's some special ones, that are out there. And in that case, maybe it's like PS3, Xbox 360, PC, because I know Rich has really easy opportunities to record those. Less so PS2.
Yeah, I think I've got a PS2 actually.
Right.
But yeah, these 3-way videos I also enjoyed back in the day. The Battlefield one we did, which was what was the name of the? I've completely
Firestorm?
forgotten. Firestorm. That was it.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, that one's well worth checking out. I will indeed add the video description the video link in the description below. That one was worth checking out. Yeah, so maybe we should do some more of those and try and make it a bit less impactful to workflow and just actually get them out, because they are fun to do. Titles that we should cover, we should probably have a bit of a think about that. But multiplayer does work.
Yes, multiplayer is easier than the others.
Okay, let's move on. This question comes from Skyrim Super Championship Turbo Edition 2. I look forward to a question from Skyrim Super Championship Turbo Edition 2 Hyper Fighting.
Yes.
But let's move on. The question itself. The Nintendo Wii U remaster, may have run dry for Switch 2, but there is still plenty of IP left for Nintendo from days of yore that went unused on Switch. What would the team most like to see unearthed from Nintendo's Kyoto Vault? I'm all in for a new Wave Race or Pilot Wings. Oliver, what do you think about this?
Yes, I think in general, Nintendo has not done a great job with their racing games.
Right.
Recently, except for Mario Kart. We get a new Mario Kart, it seems like, maybe every 10 years. The last one was in 2014. Not too often.
Wow.
I think a new F-Zero game would be really cool. Obviously, people have been asking for that for ages and ages. And, it's the last one's over 20 years old at this point, I think. A new Wave Race would be fantastic as well. We had a Wave Race on 64, Wave Race on GameCube, but none since. Those are terrific games. And always the water in those games looks quite terrific as well. So that'd be fun to look at. I think Pokemon Stadium would be cool too. I used to play those games when I was a kid, not as much now, but those are cool. The home console Pokemon games, maybe there's less of a use for those now that all Pokemon games are home console games. But that was a fun series. I think in terms of actual interesting choice, I'd say Elite Beat Agents. That was a really cool series for DS. I think they released one or two of them on the DS back in the day. I think that actually would work reasonably well given Nintendo's current orientation, because the Switch obviously has a touchscreen. It's a pretty good touchscreen. I think you could do one with fingers, or maybe with fingers and possibly a pack-in stylus or something like that. That would be very interesting. And I think that game is just a fun series, and it's something they could definitely bring back. Maybe not as an $80 game, but maybe as something a little bit more cut price, because I think that's a bit of a high asking price for a title like that. But it would be interesting.
Interesting. Any thoughts, Alex?
I would say Star Fox, mainly just because I think Star Fox 64 is a pretty cool game. I always have a soft spot in my soul for it. I like it a lot. And just in general, though, the thing that from the N64 era that they don't kind of invest so much so in anymore. Obviously, Rare was their main production house for it, but the kind of, I don't want to say collectathon, but the different scoped 3D platformer, like the adventure 3D platformer, beyond Mario, I don't think they have a lot of more differently scoped 3D platformer games, and they have so many different IPs to work from to do that. Even just taking characters from their main IP that are not the headline characters always, I think, is a fun way to do it with Nintendo. But they, their whole design process is so obfuscated. I have no idea what starts a game at Nintendo. If it just starts as an idea and they attach a character to it, or if they start with the character and they wonder about the ideas. I don't really know, unfortunately. There's probably someone who does. But I feel like Star Fox. I think Star Fox is cool.
So I think there is a bit of an issue here whereby the Switch, basically did indeed rely upon, all of the first party output from the Wii U. And, it worked in sort of bulking up the schedule. And what we're seeing now is that Nintendo is kind of going further back and making remasters / remakes of stuff like DS games, 3DS games, etc., which is a really interesting move. And what's interesting is that by and large, it's paying off. I guess, though, when you're talking about stuff like a new Wave Race or Pilot Wings, we're not talking about taking existing work and embellishing it. We're talking about brand new games based on that IP. And I'm all in on that. certainly for Pilot Wings, which I think could be absolutely terrific. But we are talking about brand new games, I think. We're talking about bringing back classic IPs like F-Zero, Pilot Wings, etc., Star Fox. And that's a completely different proposition from basically porting across stuff from Wii U with minor embellishments. So I'll just couch a bit of caution on there. But absolutely, Nintendo does have a rich and varied history of absolutely amazing games. And the nostalgia factor just makes you want to play them. So I think that's certainly a potent way forward. But it's only going to go so far in addressing the fact that your first party output is probably going to be necessarily lower than it was during the Switch era.
Right.
Just my thoughts. Let's move on to the next question. This one from Joe Tanko. Say Microsoft got Windows up and running fully optimized on ARM. What does that mean? Laptops get cheaper and more efficient. We get a killer laptop SoC. The X-Boy gets closer to becoming a reality. Windows CE makes a dramatic comeback. We'd love your prognostications on the potentials. Curious about your thoughts about this one, Oliver, because obviously you've moved through a transition from x86 to ARM on the Mac side.
Yeah.
So what do you make of this?
Well, I think in terms of the general characteristics of ARM chips, what you get is you get much better idle power. You can get much better battery life in a lot of circumstances. I think we see that on the Surface devices now, on the devices with the Snapdragon X Elite in Windows. But I think it's less the case that you get markedly better performance when under load or better efficiency there depending on the actual core itself. Because that really does depend on the core more than the architecture or general characteristics of ARM chips. So it really depends on how good those ARM chips are. Now with Apple, I think when they made that transition, they were able to design cores that were much better for their devices than the Intel chips they were using previously, in terms of that CPU core architecture, because the Intel CPU cores were very power hungry and not well suited for mobile architectures, and they were having a lot of issues with like throttling on all my MacBooks going back to 2015. I had horrible throttling on all of them. Like the CPU clock speed would go below 2 gigahertz under load. It was quite horrible, and that was addressed comprehensively with the M series chips because they're able to maintain good clock speeds at reasonable levels of power consumption. But I think they were able to build out large chips with those CPU cores and their smaller CPU cores as well. And then they were able to attach big GPUs to those CPU cores with an SoC with a big memory interface with lots of bandwidth. So maybe they would have had a good result also if they'd gone with AMD and they had a big memory interface with lots of bandwidth and a big GPU and AMD CPU IP in there. I'm not exactly sure how much of a difference that would have made to the actual performance of those devices. I think for power consumption, going to those ARM cores was very important because of how effective the power gating is on those cores. On the Snapdragon X Elite side of things, I think what you see with those CPU cores is that they're, under load, they're reasonably competitive with the x86 counterparts that they do have, but they're not giving you a markedly different battery life experience when they're actually being stressed.
Yeah, how do I tackle this one? I think one of the big things about it is that the ARM processor cores are actually less complex than x86, and certainly when you're making a console, die size is everything. Area costs a lot of money when you're making, whatever, let's say 120 million consoles. So, there's certainly going to be efficiencies there. There'll be efficiencies in power consumption, which I think is just generally a great thing. And in terms of the impact on gaming, I'm not sure there will be an impact in gaming on the console side because, Switch has got pretty poor CPU cores and it seems to cope generally all right. So I think it's just going to be more of an efficiency play. I'm just curious to see what's going to happen with x86 going forward. Just more holistically across the whole range, what's going to happen there? Does x86 become like sort of super high-end performance and gaming orientated? Will the gaming side of things, will ARM catch up there? I just don't really know. I don't think Windows CE is going to be making a comeback. The X-Boy is certainly interesting, but I think they want to get that handheld out pretty soon, and gaming on ARM is just not there yet. So maybe next generation. Laptops get cheaper, more efficient, certainly more efficient. Not sure about cheaper.
No.
Wait and see. I mean, the one thing about these chips is that they are on really low, really recent fabrication nodes. Therefore, they still are quite expensive. But that's kind of about it. Hopefully, you shouldn't really see that much of a sort of disruption in the transition. Hopefully, x86 and ARM will live side by side, and I guess it's down to the long term to see what the fortunes of x86 are. Alex, any ideas?
I mean, I think x86 is in an amazing place beyond Intel at the moment. I think AMD knows what they're doing, and they have like a roadmap, and they've had it for a while, and they're just going to keep pushing for it. I think Intel, it seems a little reactive at times, and it seems like their inability to get like power, and them just keeping pushing power, and then also not necessarily working on the lowest, smallest nodes like AMD or ARM and
There's
Apple
the whole
have access to.
Stability issue right now as well.
The stability issue is just like, this is like completely unacceptable. Like, right now I'm loving the 7800X3D. I don't want to say I haven't had any issues with AM5. I think the CPU is good, but I've had issues with my platform, regardless of that. But I think just like Intel really needs to I'm going to feel a lot more comfortable about x86's future as soon as Intel gets a chip that is competitive without being like a billion watts and it doesn't have any hardware issues. Like, Rich, you've suffered from the hardware issue. Is this correct?
The very PC I'm recording this direct on is using my dodgy 13900K, and I solved the problem simply by using that Intel baseline BIOS. But without it, it's just, all bets are off. It's just completely unstable on Premiere or any sort of media production application, except weirdly enough, Handbrake. It just powers through without any problem at all there. But yeah, I mean, if you can't trust the reliability of your PC, it's really making me rethink whether my next workstation is going to be Intel or AMD. Typically I go for Intel, but what can I say? Prior to that, I had the 5950X. Do you still use that for your workstation, Alex?
I do, and
and it's still awesome, isn't it?
It's still awesome, and I think I also prefer how non-stingy AMD boards are with regards to PCIe lanes. For me, someone who uses almost all of them, I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, what can I say? Yeah. It's in a bad place at the moment, Intel, but AMD are great. that's the bottom line.
Yeah, just in general, this is not as applicable for desktop machines, but the power consumption of a lot of these Intel chips. I mean, even like my older 10850K, it goes to 250 watts without really me doing too much. I just touch it and it goes straight to 250. So it's a little bit ridiculous. I mean, it's a little bit ridiculous. Obviously, for the desktops, it's not as important. But I kind of like that in AMD land, it's more reasonable. They seem to peak out at about like 140 watts in typical operation more often than not.
Yeah, it can go nutty with like AVX and whatnot. But it's generally just a better place to be. And I'll be watching with much interest if ARM can actually produce a chip that does sort of hit the performance that you kind of want from high end applications. Because Apple has managed that as well, right, Oliver?
Absolutely. I mean, I'm speaking to you right now on an M1 Mac Studio. I'll probably upgrade to an M4 Mac Studio or maybe an M5 Mac Studio when they come out with that. But this is the best computer I've ever owned by a long shot. I mean, it's super fast, super efficient. The CPU cluster in there is about, comparable to like a 12900K, but it consumes 50 watts, not 250 watts.
Yeah, makes sense.
So it's such a tiny computer and it's so much fun to use and it's super responsive. So I really couldn't be happier.
Great stuff. Let's move on. This question comes from 1040 STF. I know the question was asked 2 years ago when the Steam Deck released, but now in 2024, what do you think the chances are for Valve to rethink and relaunch the Steam machines? Or is the quote-unquote Valve home console just the PC as we know it now? Alex?
Well, I think they have an opportunity over time with that, not with the Steam Machine project as it was with multiple manufacturers, etc. But I think they could make a Valve Steam Top or something like that. I don't know what they'd call it.
Top.
Desktop, Steam Deck, Steam Top. I don't know.
Yeah.
But they could release like a base spec PC with integrated, unified memory, small box, maybe it comes with a controller. No, maybe not a controller. I don't know what it would come with. But, I can imagine them doing that and having just like a baseline experience that is beyond the Steam Deck in terms of power. I think they could do it, and they could have like really cool, Linux styled stuff that they do on the deck. I think it would be cool to do that, but I don't think the multiple manufacturer unified OS thing is what they're going to do anymore, because I think that's it's a huge investment. If you're just targeting one singular bit of hardware, I think it makes it more feasible like it was for the deck.
I'm going to have a bit more time to think about this. I'm going to ask you, Oliver.
I think it's a pretty good idea. I do know that using stuff like Bazite does work pretty well, seems to work pretty well. I think they've got to at least be thinking about it, if not doing it, because the Steam Deck does offer a very good experience relative to other handhelds that I use, relative to the ROG Ally, certainly. Relative to other console-like experiences, like when I'm using my desktop PC with a controller, as I so often do, I have a keyboard and mouse by my side because there's no really good front-end interface, at least before you get into like the Steam Big Picture mode, which works okay, but the actual general operating system is not running well at all with a mouse, or without a mouse and keyboard. Back then, I think with the Steam machines, the issue was game compatibility in Linux, because you had not so good game compatibility in Linux. But now with Proton, that seems to have been resolved to a large degree. There are still a slightly worrying amount of gaps, especially with multiplayer games, competitive multiplayer games, and anti-cheat and stuff like that. But for the most part, you get good enough game compatibility to the point where I think it's a viable device. And if you are saving a bit of money on a Windows license, potentially, if you are getting that really good home console experience in the home in terms of the interface, I think it could very well be a worthwhile device.
Okay, yeah. So I have thought about this now. And my general thoughts are that if they're going to do it, it would have to be an actual console-like device, as opposed to what the Steam machines were, which is, okay, you guys go out and make some PCs, and we've got an operating system that you can use, and it's great. This was not a compelling use case, and it didn't really address the issue of a viable box that lives in the living room.
Right.
It didn't seem to address that. I think what Valve has done with the front end and the sort of fundamentals with Steam Deck could translate really well to a console, but I think it's got to be a console-like device with a single unified chip, unified memory, just exactly what they've done with Steam Deck, really. And then basically it's got to work as a console with that front end in the way that Windows doesn't at the moment. I think the groundwork has been laid. I think that AMD are going in the right direction in terms of the processors that they're making. I mean, Strix Point looks really interesting. The Strix Point Halo APU with the 40 CUs is basically, should bring you into PS5 style territory. So yeah, there's an opportunity there. The question is, do they have to do it? Doesn't Steam Deck sort of tick the box already? Do you really need to have a PC gaming experience on your living room TV when you've got the Steam Deck existing already and doing a pretty good job? So yeah, I mean, I guess this strategy is effectively what Microsoft is going to be doing with Xbox going forward, in that you will have a handheld device and you will have a PC style machine that connects to your living room display and has an Xbox front end and solves that problem that way. Mm-hmm. Will Valve follow suit? I don't know. What I do know is that it will cost them a lot of money. They've got that money, but what do they fundamentally gain by making a console? when they've got Steam Deck out there. I'm not sure there's much of a win there.
Yeah.
Just my thoughts. Any final thoughts there, Alex?
No, I just, if you do sell it though, like the input device is a part of it, and that's the one like blocking
it would
feature
need a
for
controller.
me. Yeah, and they gave up on the Steam controller, so isn't
there like a Hori device that's Steam approved that's in Japan?
I don't know that one. I'm sorry, I don't know that actually.
Fair enough.
Could be. You're right. You're probably right.
Okay. Let's move on. This question from Smooth Segway. Love these usernames. Salutations! Exclamation point. The quality of Intel's XeSS has quickly matched or even surpassed AMD's FSR in many titles. Is this simply a matter of Intel committing more resources to upscaling technology, or is XeSS built on a foundation more conducive to iteration, or is it some other factor? Alex, I've got to go to you on this one, but surely it's the case that, XeSS just, I don't know, the first iteration on DP4A was kind of FSR.
Yeah, it was a lot more
adjacent.
dodgy in 1.0, but XMX was always looking pretty
awesome. Yeah,
generally great. Here I do think the iteration of machine learning is a key part to why it works the way it does. I mean, if you just think about it, with something like FSR, you can maybe see what the issues are, but then coming up with the solution of how you fix it that fits in a certain frame budget is like an iteration thing that requires a lot of thought and ingenuity and time and hours of work that may or may not pan out to fit within a frame time budget. Whereas with machine learning, it's spending, I guess, a lot more time on the background doing the iterations and getting a different model. I mean, the difference is that one is requiring a lot more individual tuning that may not work for every use case, while the other one is kind of trying to soften the issues that can come from extraneous use cases, like where things don't match up with expectations. And I think that is the key reason why XeSS is better than FSR, especially in the XMX. The thing is, it is a little bit annoying to me that people just always want to talk about DP4A because they're using it on maybe a Radeon chip or something like that. But like, really, the XMX version is so good and almost no one talks about it because no one has Intel. And I find that a bit of a shame because it's kind of like when people are like, oh, it's only so good, Intel DP4A. It's like, but look at the other thing too. That's great. So yeah, in this case, I really do think machine learning is, at least for the medium term future, the way to get results that are iterated on quickly, that are getting better more quickly. And I really hope that AMD goes down that path soon enough, because I don't think FSR is working out from a visual quality perspective vis-a-vis the competition. And I think if they want to give people a great incentive to buy their GPUs, they need the quality to be at par with DLSS.
Well, it is interesting. Obviously, I just watched your recent video on FSR 3.1. And when you have that side by side, FSR 2.2, FSR 3.1, XeSS, DP4A, DLSS, basically you've got a straight divide down the middle. The FSR iterations are simply not as good as the machine learning implementations. And even XeSS running on a chip that isn't equipped with, tensor cores or matrix multipliers, it's still looking much, much better, right?
Right, yeah.
I guess the other question which you raised in your video is, when you look at Epic's TSR, which again seems to be outperforming FSR from an image quality perspective, it kind of demonstrates that maybe there's still legs in a software-driven approach.
There probably is, and I think AMD should probably look at what they're doing there. It's all, you can just download the source if you really, really want to. And Oliver's looked at TSR more than I have because Oliver's covered more things on console, and I feel like it's panning out better there. I was genuinely shocked, like when you look at that FSR 2.2 shot versus the TSR shot, and I just made that like really simply. I was just like, okay, do a couple of kicks and punches in Tekken 8, and like just it was immediate in motion in front of my eyes that TSR was like way better. And then if I just even show it like just like the one snapshot, the FSR guy is just like full on pixels, and then the TSR one is like anti-aliasing, the thing you expect your graphics card to do for you. So yeah, I really think they should just, I do wonder if some of it is stylistic, like maybe AMD wants FSR to be visually distinct from the competition, because maybe there's been cases in history where people like raw graphics, or people like tearing, or people like a variety of different things. I'm always a little curious exactly what, or if it really is this, the hardware wasn't ready for it, so FSR is the medium term solution for AMD.
Well, DP4A doesn't run on RDNA 1, right?
No,
so
it's awful.
that is a limiting factor. XeSS doesn't run on RDNA 1. So, there is possibly the pressure to have a solution that does run on RDNA 1. But I would argue that, in terms of overall progression, what can I say? There's probably not a huge amount of RDNA 1 GPUs out there, certainly based on the Steam hardware survey. So I think they should kind of move on.
Mm-hmm.
But what can I say? It's the image quality comparisons are just blatant at this point. And something needs to shift up. Any thoughts, Oliver?
TSR is a lot better than FSR 2/3, or the image upscaling component of FSR 3, I suppose, to be more specific. In the games that I have tried it on Steam Deck and on I was taking a look at RoboCop. I think I featured that in the video. And in the FSR2 view, it's just like shimmering. It's a total mess. You're moving the camera and it's totally unstable. Whereas with TSR, it's very consistent and very clear. Probably not as clear and consistent as you get with DLSS, but certainly much, much better. And at very low resolutions, like at 360p internal, upscaling to 720p, it's a night and day difference. It could not be more different in these extreme scenarios where FSR is just like not even close. It's doing a lot better. So I don't know how it compares to XeSS necessarily in every case, but it's certainly enough to give you a good experience where FSR is not giving you a good experience. Now, of course, TSR is only in Unreal, whereas FSR is everywhere. So that's a limiting factor, a big limiting factor. But I think if TSR, is this much better than FSR, then certainly there's some room for iteration and improvement beyond just what we see with like FSR 3.1. I'm sure there's some room to improve things further. Mm-hmm. But at the moment, AMD is the only game in town really for this non-machine learning upscaler in multiple game engines. So that's kind of what you have to put up with, I suppose.
I'm just curious about one last thing, is that with DirectSR coming out now, I think AMD has the opportunity to do something that only works on their own hardware, because with that, their driver can overtake and allow for something that only runs on like RDNA 3 or RDNA 4, for example. And if a game targets DirectSR, then they don't have to worry about. I think the reason why a company like AMD, unlike NVIDIA, cannot just be like, we're a software company, is because they just don't have enough chips out there to allow for exclusive software like stuff to run. Like with NVIDIA, they can get away with it due to market share and mind share, but with AMD, they have less leeway there. So them pushing for open solutions always makes sense, I think, from their market perspective, usually. But now with DirectSR setting a playing field where the driver and Windows is just being handed inputs, and then the user, based upon their selection of IHV and driver, chooses what they want the output to be. I think that allows them in the future to iterate more and allow for things that are hardware specific. But I have no idea how many games are actually going to target DirectSR. Obviously, it just came out to a certain degree. So none, but maybe for the future, it's the way things are going to be. But I don't know. I'm kind of not so happy with DirectSR at the end of the day, because I feel like it missed an opportunity. And there was a great post on Beyond 3D about this, about they missed the opportunity to allow it to be more experimental and missed the opportunity for it to be more ambitious in what its design were, because technically there's nothing that would have prevented DirectSR to also allow the driver to do things like frame generation at the same time too.
Okay.
But that wasn't included in the spec. They also could have allowed for the game to include things like, I don't know, like material values and all these other things to allow for ray reconstruction to be used with DirectSR, but that's also not in there. It's kind of like minimum spec.
Okay.
Yeah.
Let's move on. This question.
Yeah, sorry.
Let's move on. This question's from Peter Karadimas. Hey, DF team, with The Witcher 4 moving to Unreal Engine 5, how concerned should we be about traversal stutter? Is this a solvable issue or just a part of the experience with open world Unreal Engine games? I'm going to come to you on this one, Alex, but everything is a solvable issue, right?
I think it's going to be solvable, and if there's someone that solves it, it's CD Projekt Red.
Yeah.
I think, and I also got a very great. I'm going to try. Excuse me if I'm sending this email. I'm going to send this to Oliver, but I got a wonderful little photo from an Unreal Fest. I think that was maybe in Prague or it was in the Czech Republic, of a CD Projekt Red presentation talking about stutter struggle. So they have it on their mind at some point. I think they'll try and solve it. And I think whatever they do to try and solve it will be reintegrated into UE5 on some level.
Yeah, I think back in the day when it was announced that The Witcher 4 was moving to Unreal Engine, there was talk of a collaboration between CD Projekt Red and Epic. And there are similar collaborations happening elsewhere. I think the most celebrated being the Coalition and Epic. And it's only led to good things, right? So you'd kind of hope, pray that this would be solved. Any thoughts, Oliver?
No, I mean, every Unreal Engine game that I've seen on PC, there's been some amount of traversal stutter. Pretty much everything. There's a racing game called Horizon Chase 2 that I'm very fond of, and that game also suffers from some traversal stutters at times, which is not an ideal place for them, really. But that's life. Yeah, I think if anyone's going to solve it, it's going to be CD Projekt Red. But as long as it's not too obtrusive, as long as it's not breaching some frame rate cap that you have placed in the game, then it's okay. But not ideal in any case.
You'd hope that it would be addressed, right? And but the issue, and to be fair, for all of the critiques that we've had about Unreal Engine, there has been provable progress being made. However, looking back at your last Unreal Engine video, Alex, stuff like on-the-fly shader compilation doesn't really seem to be working out as well as expected, right?
No, it's still like a halfway solution, in my humble opinion, especially because it just doesn't, it works. It's trying to take like an automated approach to something that still in its current form requires some level of input to make it actually perform right. And I'm always a little worried about those type of automated solutions that developers will just overly rely on them and as a result have bad experiences, but then just point and be like, but we did the thing. Cause sometimes there's this low-hanging fruit that developers don't address.
Okay. Let's move on to this question. Afreem the Dream. DF Gentles. A buddy of mine got me a PlayStation Portal as a wedding gift despite my protests.
All right.
Now I have it and it's just okay. Do you think it could ever be more via some sort of update, perhaps a direct connection feature of some kind, as opposed to literally behaving just like remote play on my phone does? Or maybe a miraculous hack that unlocks the ability to play older games? Cheers. Oliver, what do you reckon?
There was a hack that was publicized a few months ago, and that would certainly do it if that was released. I think they might not be releasing it, unfortunately, but that would certainly do it. I think any update or hack would be limited just because of the hardware and the fact that you only have a not too impressive chip, I think, in there, and then also only 6 gigabytes of storage available on the device itself.
Yeah.
That would be very limiting. So, would it be a good? I think it's good hardware. I think it's good hardware. I think the fact that it has limited storage necessarily puts any hopes of like using that machine for any kind of really serious emulation beyond older systems. It makes it a lot less appealing for sure. I'd like to see it happen regardless because I think it's compelling hardware, but outside of that storage issue. But it does not seem like that's a good premier use for the machine.
Yeah. Alex, thoughts?
No, I don't think that anything's going to happen. A big note, especially from the Sony side of things. I mean, if they're willing to dump PSVR 2, essentially, then they can comfortably dump Portal.
Right. Okay. How do I approach this one? The streaming experience could be better, right? There are issues with PlayStation Portal. Image quality is a problem, and latency is a problem. Now, here's the thing. I literally just Googled Tom's article about PlayStation 5 streaming, right? Which is, a similar principle. It is effectively a form of remote play. Now, the latency addition between looking at Cyberpunk 2077 here, the additional latency offered by cloud streaming is lower than remote play, which is happening within a local environment. This does not compute to me, right? I was measuring something like about 70, 80 millisecond extra latency, and with remote play. And I'm looking at Tom's table here where he's measured PlayStation 5 native gaming against cloud streaming. 60 FPS. I mean, typically we're looking at a latency addition of between 47.5 to 57.4 milliseconds, depending on whether it's a 30 or 60 FPS game, depending on whether you're using a wired or Bluetooth controller. These results are better than remote play, which says to me that there's something off with remote play, and there's a better solution that could be sorted out to make the Portal better. There are image quality issues with remote play, which I would assume could be solved by increasing the bandwidth, right? Which is exactly what PlayStation cloud streaming does. So I do reckon the PlayStation Portal could be improved. The question is whether the resources are there to make it happen. But I agree with my colleagues here that the concept of having downloadable apps and downloadable games is going to be limited simply because of the available storage on the Portal. That said, 6 gigs is plenty for like PSP games and PS1 games. So, why not? Although
maybe.
I guess you're still talking about a fairly limited selection overall.
PSP games can be like a little bit bigger.
Yeah,
like 200
for some of the bigger ones. Yeah, like a gig or two. Yeah.
Okay. Final question. This one's from John Linneman.
What?
Hey DFT, just wanted to see how the recording session is going while I'm working here. Alex, how is it going?
It's good. Weather though, I mean, it's been muggy here, and I'm pretty sure, like I say always, my specularity is increasing the bar every minute here of this presentation. Oliver, how you doing? Your bedtime is coming up for you, right?
Surely beyond.
Oh yeah, well, I suppose so. No, I'm doing pretty well. Me and John recorded a video the other night where it was 29 degrees here at the night still, because it was 32 degrees in the day. But it's okay now. It's okay now.
Well, in where I'm sitting, it's getting progressively hotter and hotter, so I'm getting progressively redder and redder to the point where when I'm doing DF clip thumbs, I'm actually desaturating my images, so I'm not quite as red.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so yes, it just gets hotter and hotter because, first of all, there's ambient noise outside of my house. Secondly, my neighbours started selling chainsaws on Facebook Marketplace.
Yeah, you just hear the chainsaw revving randomly.
So when somebody comes around who's buying a chainsaw off him, he does a demonstration. It's a bit off-putting for recording. Thankfully, today's been okay, but generally, John, it's going fine. And that's it. That's the final question, therefore the end of the show. So please do like, subscribe, share if you enjoyed it. Ring bells for things that may or may not happen. Store.digitalfoundry.net for access to our lovely range of merchandising wares. But that's all from us for this week. Thanks for watching and supporting Digital Foundry, and we'll see you next week.